No, I'm afraid it wasn't a dream. Rishi Sunak did call an election for July the 4th, and 6 weeks, 6 very long weeks of campaigning have begun in earnest. I'm Neil Paterson, and the Sky News Daily will be there for every twist and turn in the electioneering. Later, we are going to dip our toes into the digital campaign to see how the parties will try to take the lead in that increasingly crowded space. But why don't we start with the two main political parties? Travelling with the Prime Minister on the first full day of campaigning, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. Sam, tell me exactly what has the Prime Minister been up to today? He's travelling the length and breadth, isn't he?
It's planes, trains, and if not quite automobiles, then rather fading coaches. Rishi Sunak is trying to, in the first 48 hours of this campaign, go to every single nation of the United Kingdom. So we've ticked off England in the form of Derbyshire. We've ticked off Cardiff in South Wales. And as we speak, I'm standing in the security queue to get on his, private jet funded by CCHQ, funded by Tory donors, up to the Highlands in Scotland, where we will be doing the next campaign visit before heading to Northern Ireland in the morning. Look, the purpose of doing this is Rishi Sunak wants to show that he may be the underdog, he may be 20 points behind, but he's going to throw everything in it. He's got the energy and he would say the plan in order to convince the country not to flip to Keir Starmer and to stick with him on July the 4th. That's the plan. The question is, will it work?
And Sam, I have to say, if you're going to be taking a trip back to the motherland, private jet is always the way that I like to do it as well. But whilst he's making these visits, are we actually hearing anything in terms of policy, or is it all the big broad brushstroke stuff about, Captain Hindsight, Captain Flip-Flop, so on and so forth?
You raise one arch eyebrow at the method of transport. And yes, you do have Rishi Sunak trying at these events to kind of hang out with ordinary workers whilst travelling by private jet. In the same way that we've just had Rishi Sunak at a brewery despite being teetotal. There is a little bit of jarring. Is the contents of these events likely to change people's minds? Well, if I'm being honest, Neil, I struggle to believe that it is. He sets out his narrative of being an underdog. He says that the world is a more dangerous place and you can't really risk letting Labour take the keys to number 10, given all of that, and that they've got a plan for how they're going to continue to make the civil service more lean and spend the money on defence spending, and they've got a plan to stop people using sick notes as a way of getting off work. All of that, but it is more of the same. But Rishi Sunak's bigger goal is something more complex than that. That's going to take something a bit more, I suspect. He needs to change people's minds about him. People were introduced to him as Chancellor when he was wildly popular, possibly because he gave away something in the region up to 100 billion quid during the pandemic. As Prime Minister, he has plunged to become relatively more unpopular than Keir Starmer. Now he needs to change minds again.
How's the Prime Minister intending to change people's minds, Sam, when we know as of this morning that his headline immigration policy, sending people to Rwanda, none of the flights are actually going to take off this side of the election?
So he's simply on that saying, trust me. Look, when you look at how he talks about policy, there is something of a gap between the presentation and the reality. So he talks about the economy having turned a corner, and that's on the basis of inflation. They are talking about immigration policy, but net migration is only just a little bit off what it was last year. And I wouldn't be surprised if they pulled off a surprise and did it this side of the election. But they're currently messaging that it's going to be the other side of the election. So the sort of gap between we're the people that deliver and the sort of reality of how things are, voters are going to have to make up their own mind on whether the one reflects the other.
Indeed they will. I suppose, though, some good news for the Prime Minister today in the rather unexpected shape of Nigel Farage, the honorary president of Reform UK, rather more interested, it would appear, in politics across the Atlantic than standing for, what was it? It will be an 8th time, I think, to try and get a parliamentary seat.
This is an interesting one. Now, one of the explicit goals for Rishi Sunak calling this election early, I think, was to wrong for Reform UK, the party to the right of him, that poses that danger because it eats into the Tory vote all over the country, potentially. And so they are going to chalk up as a win the fact that Nigel Farage isn't going to stand as a candidate for Reform UK at this set of elections. And they'll say Reform UK has been wrong-footed and this is the kind of thing going their way. I suspect, Neil, the truth is that Nigel Farage was always quite unlikely to stand for Reform UK at this election, partly because of America, but partly because of what some Tories like Liz Truss and others are saying, which is that actually maybe after the election, Nigel Farage has more of a home inside the Tory party. And if Nigel Farage has spent the election campaign going 7 bells against the Tory party, if that invitation is extended to him post-election when the Conservatives are, as they may well be, in opposition and trying to work out what they stand for and how they do things, and a leader such as Robert Jenrick or some such invites him in, then this makes life a lot easier. So I think that Nigel Farage still has designs on the Tory party, and that actually was probably a bigger reason than the early timing of the election.
Sam, thank you. And of course, despite the opposition presumably being caught as much on the hop by the announcement as the rest of us, Labour also launched their election campaign. Jon Craig is our chief political correspondent. Jon, what's Sir Keir been up to?
Well, Sir Keir Starmer has kicked off his general election tour, roadshow, whatever you like to call it, in Gillingham in Kent. Now, that is a seat held by the Conservative MP Raymond Chishti, with a majority of round about 15,000, so you wouldn't really call it a marginal, but it is a seat that Labour did hold during the Blair years, and it's example, really, of Labour, I suppose, setting their sights quite high. We saw the banners saying change, and we heard Sir Keir say, end the chaos. My goodness, we're going to hear that a lot. But Sir Keir, well, first general election campaign. It's worth pointing out, Sir Keir is not exactly a seasoned political campaigner, nor is Rishi Sunak, of course, because both of them were not elected to Parliament until 2015. And so they're not veterans like when you think back to Tony Blair, David Cameron, they'd fought a few general elections before they became party leader. So they're both really, to a certain extent, novices on the election campaign. And Sir Keir really, well, at least he had a jacket on, even if he didn't have a tie on today. I don't know about you, Neil. I'm not wild about a man of 61 dressing as if he's 17.
Well, Jon, I look forward to seeing what you're wearing on the campaign trail. But look, perhaps do we see a little bit of that political election inexperience in Sir Keir Starmer in the ambition of what was the first full day of campaigning? Rishi Sunak's up and down the country. The Labour leader content just to have, by my count, just the one visit, really.
Kent is full of seats that Labour hope to win, and that's presumably why Sir Keir has chosen that. The other place I'd expect him to see him go pretty soon is Scotland, where, of course, that's another key battleground. The other place I would expect Sir Keir to go very soon is Scotland, of course, where Labour face a big battle with the SNP, who've had terrible problems. As he launched his election campaign, John Swinney, the latest SNP leader, they've had 3 in the last few years, as have the Tories. Now, of course, Labour feel rejuvenated in Scotland. They regard Anas Sarwar as a vote winner. And I know from talking to senior SNP MPs at Westminster that the SNP are more worried by Labour now they've got Anas Sarwar as leader. And the polls are suggesting that Labour are ahead of the SNP in Scotland now. Well, if Labour are going to win the general election, 30 or so seats, possibly more, they used to have 40 or so, would be a huge bonus for them. Coming back to England, you've got Kent, you've got North West England and the West Midlands as well, key battlegrounds. And not to mention the Red Wall, of course, where they lost all those seats last time.
In a nutshell, a very big nutshell, that is what Labour and indeed some of the smaller parties are trying to do. But Jon, you know, you've covered plenty of election campaigns, a couple more than me, although you and I have been on the campaign trail together, and that was an eye-opening experience at the time. 6 weeks, that seems long to me in terms of a campaign. So I'm just wondering, you know, what you will be looking out for in terms of momentum, in terms of the way in which Labour are setting out their stall right now. I mean, things will ramp up, but we shouldn't expect this to be full-bore, 100% campaigning from day one onwards, should we? I
mean, obviously Rishi Sunak has opted for a long campaign in the hope that he can claw back that big Labour opinion poll lead. The Sky poll of polls has got Labour's opinion opinion lead at around about the 20% mark, which is a big lead. Our election expert, Michael Thrasher, was saying that no governing party has ever come back from so far behind. A lot of Tory MPs are very cross that it's a long campaign. Some of them have been saying to me, in Maggie's day, we only had a 3-week campaign. Well, she did win elections pretty comfortably with big majorities. As for Labour, well, obviously the Tories want Labour to trip up and make mistakes. One of the things I think that's playing well for Labour is the good reputation of Rachel Reeves as Shadow Chancellor. And I think one of the things she's done, which is quite astute, is kept on hammering away at the message of, do you feel better or worse off than you did 14 years ago when the Conservatives first came to power? And of course, Labour's argument is that despite the latest figures with inflation coming down, people are indeed worse off in this cost of living crisis. If you want to ask me, Neil, what are Sir Keir's 6 missions, just to recap for our listeners.
John is consulting his notes here.
I am actually, yeah. Deliver economic stability. 2, cut NHS waiting times. Well, everyone wants to do that. 3 is a new border security command. Set up Great British Energy. Well, that sounds like possibly like another nationalised industry. Crack down on antisocial behaviour. Well, I think most people would agree with that. And recruit 6,500 new teachers. A lot of people say, why nothing about housing in Sir Keir's 6 pledges? That's a pretty fair question, I would say.
And just to prove John's crystal ball credentials, shortly after we spoke, it was confirmed Labour will be heading to Scotland very soon indeed. Stay where you are. After the break, we'll focus on the digital campaign as election 2024 gets underway. Back soon. Welcome back to the Daily. Now, of course, as well as daily updates from the campaign trail, we will be trying to dig just a little bit more deeply into how the parties are campaigning. And of course, one of the major battlegrounds will be and will forever be online. Is this yet another year in which we'll hear plenty of people describing this as a digital election? I can guarantee it. One man who knows an awful lot more about this, though, than I do, Tom Cheshire, our data and forensics correspondent. Although, Tom, your title has slightly shifted.
It's very exciting, Neil.
Go on.
Butterfly out of my chrysalis. For the next 6 weeks, I will be yours and everyone's online election correspondent. So we'll be looking at the campaign. We're actually teaming up some really, really bright people using some really bright tech to get into this. Because as you say, it is going to be such a key battleground. We do say this every year. You're exactly right. This is the digital election. Tech moves on really quickly, and I think that is fair. If you've got a 5-year gap, things will move on. TikTok is something we didn't talk about in 2019 or 2017. That is going to be interesting to say the least, especially because they've got different rules, which we can maybe talk about. But also the other big difference here, and really want to talk about this, is the money. I mean, the key to a lot of politics, wherever you are in the world, the money here has really, really increased. It's gone from the election spending, the limits put in by the Electoral Commission, £19.5 million up to £35 million. So nearly doubling. One of the easiest ways to spend money is, as we all know, spend it online.
Speak for yourself.
In this case, on digital advertising, which would be a bit of a weird way to spend your own money. But that's going to be huge. It's where people can really pour this in. So I think they're going to flood the zone. It's going to be very hard to escape this campaign.
Let's just start. I mean, we are day one of the campaign proper. How have the government, how have the official opposition responded in that online space?
I think it was pretty lacklustre to start, to be honest, from the Conservatives, given that they're in charge of this, and it did feel rushed, and lots of MPs were taken, the cabinet was taken by surprise, perhaps. True. But you'd think they'd be able to press go on a campaign. It didn't feel like that. It took them a while even to put a tweet up. It was just an image, had quite a long text on it. It wasn't very dynamic at all. And that was the only thing they had for a while. You compare that to Labour. They had this video ready to go. They had their message changed. Maybe the video wasn't best for social media because it's actually sort of formatted for YouTube or traditional TV, that aspect ratio. But it was there, it was consistent. They had other things. They had fundraising emails going out. They changed the website. The Conservatives did none of that. Sam Jeffers, who's the executive director of Who Targets Me, who we're going to be working with a lot over this, he described the Conservative campaign as almost a dereliction of duty. You compare it to what the Democrats do in the US when they have one. Even when it comes to launching videos, Joe Biden, he'll have them in a vertical format. It's all ready to go, and it didn't feel like that was the case last night.
Are you in any way surprised by that? Because and the reason I mention that is, for quite some time, the Conservatives and Labour, but we're focused on the Conservatives just for now, they have been thought of as quite adept, quite agile when it comes to digital.
And we did see that. You're exactly right, especially in the branding around Rishi Sunak. You know, when he was taking over, we saw a lot of very glossy photos. We saw a lot of Facebook advertising, which was even before the local elections. That was about brand Sunak and doing that. So you would have thought, actually, maybe we'll have more of that ready to go. He did go in afterwards, eventually recorded another video inside Number 10 saying, this is what I'm calling the election. And that was a bit more personable, a bit more as you might expect. But yeah, yesterday just felt a bit rushed. Now, 24 hours isn't everything. And a lot of this was on Twitter, which isn't, necessarily the biggest platform. There are, WhatsApp is the most used sort of social media, if we can define it like that. But then you've got Instagram, Facebook. But it maybe does speak that, if you're not seizing that moment, and what a lot of people were able to do is rush in there with the memes instead, because it did lend itself to that with the water everywhere, win or lose an election there. But if that's sort of the state of the digital campaign, you've got to get better at that. We've seen some memes today from the Conservatives, which just, they don't really work. Maybe they'll finesse that. And we have seen that in previous campaigns. Some of the strategists they've worked with in Australia, for instance, and New Zealand, have sort of talked about 24-hour meme machines. Sometimes they'll land, they're just putting a lot out of it, which is why you'll see a lot of bad memes. But they want to hit that one which just does go viral, especially when it comes to TikTok. It gets picked up by the algorithm, and that is sort of winning for them.
Can moments like that genuinely, do you think, shape the kind of the electoral narrative?
The narrative's really interesting, right? So if you think about last night in the pouring rain, and this is just more of a bigger point than a tech point, you see Obama do that, it looks amazing. You even see Trump in the rain with lights, and it can look quite heroic. It's because the narrative is where it is, he looks a bit soggy instead.
Given the size of the spend that both parties will have available to them, depending on funding, of course, there's an awful lot of activity going to be happening here. So what?
Paying for it versus not, I think, is a good place to start. So, and we have really good data on this. So you remember sort of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, I think that was fairly overblown in terms of its effects. But as a result of it, Facebook and Google published very, very particular data about this. So we can track what people are seeing, what people are spending money on already. People like Who Targets Me, as I mentioned as well, they keep a very granular eye on this. And it's been interesting seeing that so far. So if you look at the start of the year, actually, between them on Meta, which owns Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, the main political parties have spent around £5 million already, which is a lot of money. And that reflects that it has been this sort of long election that we were talking about. Everyone's like, when's it going to happen? We had the local election. That wasn't actually a huge jump in spending for them. But £5 million, in the 2019 general election, all the major parties spent £10 million between them. So we're already at day one. We're halfway there to what they spent in the entire campaign last time. But TikTok, I think, that is it's getting older, its demographics, but it is a young demographic. So it's interesting for people to reach. They don't allow political paid advertising. So it's a lot harder to see what's going on. It's a lot harder to measure it.
So what's that then? What, influencers?
And so it has to be organic content. I think we might see a sort of grey area of organic content when it comes
I suspect we will.
Yeah. So influencers is going to be a big strategy. We know both parties have been reaching out to them. Now, if they pay for it, you are supposed to say, I've been paid money to do that. That's going to require people keeping a careful eye on it. We're going to be keeping a careful eye on it to work those out. But those influencers could reach a different crowd.
And of course, I think back to the last time that we were doing an election of this type in 2019, and indeed the kind of the Brexit referendum as well. And buzzwords back then, targeted ads. With the passage of years, one has to assume that they are even better now.
Actually, it's a lot of work. And you think, well, could you combine that with AI? So it's generating messages. And we have seen some sort of innovative use of that in terms of campaigns trying to reach individual voters. So rather than someone saying all the names out loud, they can say like, hi, Tom, we think you'll be interested in this, X, Y, Z. I think that is a possibility.
You've set out the stall quite well, and over the course of the next 6 weeks, we will be getting via you the data and the analysis that we can really dig down into what they are doing in terms of the campaigning and how effective it might be. But I suppose, and this is something that you've been commenting on about online already, the unavoidability of this election. Decades past, if you didn't switch on the telly, you didn't buy a newspaper, you could remain removed, or at least at a remove, from a general election process. Given that we all carry around smart devices with us these days, people live half their lives apparently on social media, there is an unavoidability. And I don't know whether that will engender greater engagement with the political process or just piss everybody off.
I think I can see which way that's going to go out of those two options. I mean, yeah, I was speaking to Professor Kate Dommett, who's the Professor of Digital Politics at University of Sheffield. We're also working with her. She's an absolute genius, and she was saying she was about to do her yoga, and that sort of video got interrupted by Keir Starmer coming along. It is, and that's an unskippable video, and she thinks that's going to be, you get a lot of that on YouTube. I'm sorry, there's no escaping it. Yeah, the unskippable election coming up.
I'm already looking forward to a digital detox starting in about 6 weeks and 2 days. Tom, best of luck with the campaign ahead. Thanks very much for being here.
Thank you.
Well, with the campaign now underway, me and the Daily Podcast team will be here Monday to Friday, bringing you the analysis you need to make sense of the election and to understand the choices you have on offer. Our team of correspondents and specialists will be everywhere, including the places the politicians would rather they weren't, reporting on every aspect of what already looks like being a bruising campaign. I do hope you'll join us. But that's your lot for today. We'll see you again soon.